Chapter 14 The Jolly Fisherman. It was noon before Aunt Matilda and Uncle Titus returned to the salvage yard with the information that Eloise Dobson was the most stubborn creature on the face of the earth. In spite of Chief Reynolds arguing and Aunt Matilda's considerable power of persuasion, Mrs. Dobson had firmly and rather angrily announced that no one was going to drive her out of her father's house. "She was ready enough to go last night," said Jupiter. "Then you should have been seeing that she had left," snapped Aunt Matilda, and she stormed across the street to the house to make lunch. Jupiter rinsed the last of the marble pieces with the hose and went in to take a shower. After lunch, he returned to the salvage yard. His aunt had neglected to issue any instructions for the afternoon, so Jupiter made his way to headquarters through Tunnel 2, and then escaped unseen from the salvage yard through Redgate Rover. He then hurried down to the Rocky Beach Police Department. Jupiter found Chief Reynolds brooding behind his desk. "Anything on your mind, Jones?" asked the chief. "There's a man staying at the Seabreeze Inn who has been rather over-attentive to Mrs. Dobson," said Jupiter. "In that department," said the chief, "I think Miss Dobson can take care of herself." "That's not what concerns me," said Jupiter. "He's led Miss Hopper to believe that he's here to fish. However, he does not catch anything." "So? He's got rotten luck." "That is certainly possible, but his car was parked across from the Potter's house on Saturday when I was attacked in the Potter's office. Also, he attempted to visit Miss Dobson last evening, not long before the second set of flaming footprints appeared in the house. And then there are his clothes."
"What about his clothes?"
"Well, they're all brand new, so far as I can judge," said Jupiter. "It's almost as if he were costumed for a part in the film. The clothes, incidentally, do not match the car he drives. That is old and somewhat battered. It's a tan Ford. Perhaps you might wish to wire Sacramento to see how the car is registered. The man calls himself Ferrier."
"He may just do that because it's his name," said the chief. "Look, Jones, I know you think you're the greatest thing since Sherlock Holmes, but I wish you'd knock off this business of snooping around where you're not wanted. And I've got real problems. That Miss Dobson seems to expect me to produce her missing father, if he is her father, by nightfall, if not sooner. With my overwhelming staff of 8 men, I'm to go out and scour the Pacific Coast Range and find a man who doesn't want to be found. And I'm also expected to figure out how somebody got into a locked house and set stairs on fire."
"Have you had any report from the lab on the charred linoleum?" asked Jupiter.
"When I do, you may be the last to know," said Chief Reynolds. "Now go away and let me have my headache in peace."
"Well, you don't plan to wire Sacramento?" Jupiter persisted.
"No, I don't."
"And if you go bothering that Ferrier guy, I'll personally have you declared a public nuisance." "Very well," said Jupiter. And he left the chief's office and proceeded with all due speed to the Seabreeze Inn. He noted with satisfaction that the tan Ford was not in the parking area. Miss Hopper, he knew, was addicted to afternoon naps and might well be dozing peacefully in her own apartment. With the exception of a stray guest or two, that left only Marie, the maid, to be reckoned with. The lobby of the Seabreeze Inn was deserted, and the door behind the desk was closed. Jupiter tiptoed around the desk. Miss Hopper was an extremely meticulous innkeeper, and Jupiter knew her very well. He found the spare key to room 113 where he knew it would be, in its properly numbered slot in the bottom drawer of Miss Hopper's desk. Jupiter extracted the key without making a sound, put the key in his pocket, and strolled out on the veranda. Marie was nowhere to be seen, and there were no guests lounging on the terrace which overlooked the beach. Jupiter put his hands in his pockets and sauntered along the veranda. When he reached the door of room 113, he stopped and waited, listening. No one stirred anywhere in the inn. "Mr. Ferrier?" he called, knocking softly. Mr. Ferrier didn't answer. With great care, Jupiter slid the key into the lock, opened the door, and stepped into the room. "Mr. Ferrier?" he said again softly. But the room was empty and tidy. Marie had had time to make up the bed and vacuum the carpet. Jupiter eased the door shut and set to work. The dressing table drawers were empty, and so were the desk drawers. Mr. Ferrier had not troubled to unpack his handsome suitcases, except for several crisp and sporty jackets which hung in the wardrobe, along with half a dozen spotless turtleneck shirts and several pairs of cleanly creased blue duck slacks. Jupiter felt the pockets of these garments, but they were empty. Next, Jupe turned his attention to the suitcases. There were two. One stood open on a little bench at the foot of a bed. It contained about what one would expect a suitcase to contain: pajamas, socks, a pair of sneakers which looked like they had never been worn, underwear, and wadded up at the bottom of the bag, a few pieces of clothing in need of laundering. The second suitcase stood on the floor next to the bench. It was closed, but when Jupe tried it, he discovered that it was not locked. There were more clothes, all new and bearing labels of various Los Angeles men's shops. One shirt still had the price tag attached, and Jupiter almost gasped when he saw how much it cost. Jupiter's probing fingers touched the paper in the bottom of the suitcase. He lifted the clothes out, careful not to disarrange anything, and stared at a piece of folded newspaper. It was the classified section of the Los Angeles Times. An item in the personal column was circled. It read, "Nicholas, I am waiting. Write Alexis at P.O. Box 213, Rocky Beach, California." Jupiter lifted the paper out. There was another sheet of newsprint beneath it. It was the part of the classified section of the New York Daily News, and an identical advertisement appeared there. There was also a copy of the Chicago Tribune with the same notice. Jupiter glanced at the dates on the newspapers. They were all the date of April 21st editions of that year. Jupiter frowned. He put the Chicago Tribune back where he had found it and placed the Daily News back on top of that, and the Los Angeles newspaper on top of that. And then he replaced the clothing in the suitcase, closed the case, and put it down again on the floor. Whatever the jaunty fisherman had come for, Jupiter Jones decided it had little or nothing to do with fish. Jupiter quickly inspected the bathroom, which contained only shaving gear and clean towels, and was on his way to the door when he heard brisk footprints on the veranda outside. A key rattled in the door lock of room 113. Jupe looked around wildly. He decided that he would not be able to squeeze himself under the bed, and he dodged into the wardrobe. He took shelter behind one of Mr. Ferrier's clean jackets and held his breath. Jupe heard Ferrier come into the room. The man was humming a tuneless tune. He crossed the bed, stopped there for a moment or two, and then went into the bathroom. The bathroom door closed, and Jupiter heard water running in the basin. Jupiter slipped out of the closet and sped on his toes toward the door. He had it open in a second. The water continued noisily running into the bathroom. Jupiter backed out onto the veranda, pulling the door closed as he left. The instant before it shut completely, he saw that Mr. Ferrier had dropped something on the bed. The supposed jolly fisherman had a gun. Chapter 15. Jupe has a plan. Pete had finished mowing the lawn and was mixing a lemonade when the telephone rang. "Pete," said Jupiter Jones, "can you come to headquarters right after supper?" I can if it's not going to be another all-night thing," said Pete. "Mom's not going for that twice in a row." "No, it won't be an all-night thing," promised Jupiter. "I have some new and interesting information which may help our client. I've left a message for Bob. Perhaps when he returns from the library, he will also have some helpful information for us." "We can use that," said Pete. Jupiter's hopes were well-founded. When Bob appeared at headquarters that evening, he was almost staggering under the weight of two large books which had pieces of paper tucked in to mark various pages. "A Lapathian dictionary," said Bob brightly. "Lapathian English, that is. You wouldn't believe how hard they are to come by. We had to arrange a special loan from the big library in Los Angeles. My father picked up the books on his way home from work. The second one is a complete history of Lapathia." "Great!" exclaimed Pete. "Hey, have you been able to decipher the document we found at the Potter's?" asked Jupiter. "Well, most of it. The rest we can guess," said Bob. Thank heavens Lapathian isn't like Russian. They use a regular alphabet. If I had to translate for some other kind of writing, I think I'd just shoot myself. Well, what's a document? Jupiter asked. Bob took the folded parchment from between the pages of the dictionary and put it down on the desk. Next to it, he put a piece of paper on which he had worked out in pencil and in many erasures and crossings out the message of the parchment. It goes kind of like this, said Bob. Know all men that on this day, 25th of August of the year 1920, Alexis Karenov, having attained his majority and having sworn fealty to his monarch, is named Duke of Malanbad, and to his care and conscience are entrusted the crown and the scepter of Lapathia. He to guard them with his body against all enemies for the peace of the monarch. Bob looked up. Well, that's about it, he said. And there's the seal with the eagle, and there's a signature, but you can't read it. People are sloppy about signatures. Well, and the more important they are, said Jupiter, the sloppier they tend to get. Could it be Asimov? Bob shrugged. It could be anything, he said. It probably is Asimov or some variation because the Karenov family turned out to be big wheels in Lapathia. Boris Karenov didn't just fade away and disappear. He hung around and he was ever so helpful. Bob opened the second book he had brought into a place and he had previously marked with paper. Look, this book's indexed, he said happily, so we don't have to wade all the way through the Boris Karenov who made the crown for old Duke Frederick. And then advised Frederick. When Frederick decided to be king, he helped Frederick lay out the streets around the castle at Madenhof, and he superintended things where the castle itself was enlarged. He figured that kings needed scepters, so he designed and he made the scepter of the Asimovs. Frederick was dully grateful and named him Duke of Malanbad. Malanbad was one of those interesting coincidences, and it happened to be Duchy, which had formerly been ruled by Ivan the Bold. Wait a minute, interrupted Pete. Hey, let's keep track of the cast here. Ivan the Bold, wasn't he the guy that stood up to Duke Frederick and wouldn't swear the oath of loyalty? And he got very dead as a result. Yeah, and his head was stuck up on the castle at Madenhof. He's the one. Karenov got Ivan's ruby for the imperial crown, and he got Ivan's estates for his very own, and he got himself named a duke and also the keeper of the royal jewels, which makes sense since he made them, and he got very, very rich, and the Karenovs stayed that way from this day on. And the book is full of Karenovs. All the first sons and the first sons became dukes of Malanbad, and also keepers of the crown and the scepter. Bob then turned to another part of the book. The Karenovs are almost more interesting than the Asimovs, he said. They lived for a while in old Ivan's castle at Malanbad, but about 300 years ago, they abandoned the castle and moved to the capital in Madenhof. And you're going to love the reason why. Why are we going to love it? Asked Jupiter. It's so pat I can't believe it, said Bob. It seems there was a bit of trouble at Malanbad, and one of the Karenov daughters, her name was Olga, was accused of practicing witchcraft. Wasn't that tricky? Asked Pete. I mean, wouldn't it be kind of dangerous to accuse the Duke's daughter of being a witch? Well, not as tricky as you might think, said Bob. It was one of these hysteria things, much like the epidemic of supposed witchcraft at Salem, and everybody was accusing everybody. The girl had to have bad fortune to fall out with her father because she wanted to marry the local innkeeper, and he did not approve. Besides, he was accused himself. He was worried about his own skin, and he had to call on the then ruling Asimov to come to his defense. So the girl was burned at the stake. Wow, said Pete. Burned? Jupiter came to rigid attention. And then the Karenovs left their castle of Malanbad? Yes, you see, after she was burned, the girl, or I guess you could say her ghost, kept coming back to the castle and trampling around and leaving flaming footprints, cried Jupiter. Right, said Bob. So the castle was deserted, and now it's a ruin. And the Karenovs stayed in the capital until that revolution we know about in 1925, when they disappeared. There isn't another mention of them in the entire book. The three investigators sat in silence for a moment, digesting this information. Wow, I guess, I guess I'll hazard a guess that a very well-informed guess, thanks to Bob and Mr. Alexander Potter's real name is, said Jupiter at last. If you guess that it's Alexis Karenov, I'm with you, said Bob. But Tom said that was a long name, protested Pete. It had lots of C's and Z's in it. Well, no doubt he was not going to use his real name when he met Tom's grandmother, surprised Bob. And remember her description of him. Yes, he smelled like wet clay, said Pete. Yes, and he was extremely nervous that he had 3 locks on every door. To this day, he's a great believer in locks. The Potter is a man with a secret, and he's also a man who's trying to send a message, said Jupiter. What message? Said Bob. Jupiter quickly recounted his adventure of the afternoon. He told of the search of the Jolly Fisherman's room and of the gun, and also of the newspapers with identical advertisements in the classified columns. A New York paper, a Los Angeles Times, and the Chicago Tribune, he said, all published on the same date, April 21st, all begging Nicholas to write Alexis at a post office box in Rocky Beach. Nicholas? Echoed Bob. Your index had got a Nicholas we can use? Asked Pete. Well, Nicholas was the name of the oldest son of William IV of Lapathia, said Bob. He turned several more pages in his book, and he shoved the volume around so that the 2 other boys could see the last photograph ever taken of the royal family of Lapathia. There was His Majesty, William IV, his extravagant wife, and 4 sons, ranging from a tall young man who stood directly behind His Majesty to a boy who was about 10. The one on the right behind the king is the Grand Duke Nicholas, said Bob. And William IV was the one who fell off the balcony, said Jupiter. According to the account in the encyclopedia, the queen took poison. Whatever happened to Nicholas? He said he's to have hanged himself. Well, and the other 2 children? Well, the 2 middle boys also hanged themselves, according to the generals who engineered the takeover. The little one accidentally fell into the bath and was drowned. Jupiter bit at his lip. Well, let us suppose then, just for the sake of argument, that the Grand Duke Nicholas did not hang himself. How old would he be today? He'd be over 70, said Bob. How old do you think the Potter is? Well, somewhere around there, Jupe. But you don't think the Potter could really be the Grand Duke? No, I do not. I think he's Alexis Karenov, who vanished on the day the Asimov family was destroyed. What day was that, by the way? Bob consulted his book. April 21st, 1925. And on April 21st of this year, someone named Alexis, who we are suspected is the Potter, inserted an advertisement in newspapers in widely separated parts of the country, imploring somebody named Nicholas to communicate with him. The advertisement would seem to have drawn Mr. Ferrier, who is really no fisherman at all, to Rocky Beach. He could not possibly be Nicholas Asimov. He's too young. Well, perhaps the same advertisement got those 2 nuts from Lapathia here, said Bob. And by the way, there's a bit on General Kalak. He was in at the kill, and he's been one of the ruling generals of Lapathia ever since. There's a picture of him here on page 433. Jupiter turned the leaves of the book to page 433. The caption indicates that the general was 23 when this was taken in 1926, he said. He hasn't changed a great deal. He didn't have any hair there either. I wonder if he's naturally bald or if he shaves his head. That would be a novel way to present appearance of aging. You shave your head and your eyebrows, and nothing will ever go gray. Should work fine if you don't sag too much, declared Pete. Most certainly he has not sagged, said Jupiter. He would be about the same age as the Grand Duke Nicholas, if the Grand Duke Nicholas is alive. And as the Potter, I don't think, however, that it was the advertisement which brought him to Rocky Beach. I think it was that photo spread in Westways. Dmitriev is evidently a resident of Los Angeles, since the Lepathian Board of Trade mentions an office there. Remember, Cowlick said that the Potter had been written up in one of our periodicals. So as far as I know, Westways is the only periodical which has ever published a photograph of the Potter. Dmitriev could have seen it and the eagle medallion, and informed his superiors in Lepathia. And in comes the general, said Pete. Yes, a thoroughly distasteful person. However, all this speculation does not bring us any closer to helping our client, Tom Dobson. It seems clear that somebody who knows the family history of the Karanovs and the tale of the flaming footprints in the haunted castle is trying to frighten Miss Dobson and Tom out of the house. There can only be one reason for this. They believe that there is something of value in the house. Now, Miss Dobson knows nothing of the Karanovs, and she has a remarkable stubborn streak, so she refuses to move. If we can persuade Miss Dobson and Tom to leave the place and return to the Seabreeze Inn, or perhaps even go into Los Angeles, we may see some action more significant than flaming footprints. Yeah, like baiting a mousetrap, said Pete. Yes, that is the case. The trap must be empty. Mrs. Dobson and Tom cannot be in the house. The two men at Hilltop House have not made a move since she arrived, and the man who calls himself Ferrier has done nothing more effective than to attempt to have coffee with Miss Dobson. And of course, the Potter remains among the missing. Yeah, so we get Miss Dobson to move out, and then we watch, said Pete. That's right, said Jupe. We will have to be very careful. Well, you'll have to be very persuasive, said Pete. There are times when Miss Dobson reminds me of your Aunt Matilda. Chapter 16. The Trap is Sprung. It was well after 7 when the three investigators reached the Potter's house. Pete pounded on the front door, and Jupiter called out to identify himself. Young Tom Dobson opened the door. Hey, your timing is perfect, he said. Come on in. The investigators trailed after Tom to the kitchen, where Miss Dobson sat in one of the straight chairs and watched a pair of green flames flicker out and die on the linoleum near the cellar door. You know, she said without much emotion, this sort of thing loses its shock value after a while. Where were you when it happened, Miss Dobson? Asked Jupiter. Upstairs, said Miss Dobson. Something went bang, and Tom came down here to see what, and there were some more of these nice cheering footprints. We want to search the house? Tom Dobson invited. I was about to do that when you guys showed up. I doubt we would learn anything new, said Jupe. We've already searched it, put in Pete, and so have Chief Reynolds' men. Have you had any news from the chief, incidentally? Jupiter asked. Not a word, said Elaine Dobson. Miss Dobson, said Jupiter, getting quickly to the main purpose of his visit. We think you should leave, and the sooner the better. I will not, said Miss Dobson. I came to see my father, and I am going no place until I do see him. The Seabreeze Inn isn't far, suggested Bob gently. Aunt Matilda would be glad to put you up for a night or two, offered Jupiter. You wouldn't have to leave Rocky Beach, urged Pete. Just leave this house. Miss Dobson glared at the three of them. What's up with you three? She demanded. Hasn't it occurred to you that someone is trying to frighten you out of here? Said Jupiter. Of course it's occurred to me. I would have to be the world's champion dimwit for it not to occur to me. Well, I don't scare that easily. Well, Miss Dobson, we believe that the person who is creating the flaming footprints is not simply a trickster, said Jupiter. Whoever he is, he knows a great deal about your father and about your father's family history. He knows more than you do, although he cannot suspect how little you have really been told. It's our theory that he wants a clear field. He wants to search this house without interruption. We suggest that you, given the opportunity, move out now while it's still light, give him a chance to see that you are going, and then drive down to Rocky Beach and remain there. Pete, Bob, and I will watch to see what takes place after you leave." "You can't mean that," cried Miss Dobson. "We do," said Jupiter. "You want me to clear out and let this oddball who's been running around making flaming footprints come romping through my father's house?" "I think that's the only way we'll ever discover the purpose behind all of this," said Jupiter. Your father's disappearance, the search of the house which occurred the day you arrived, and the flaming footprints, well, everything." Elaine Dobson frowned at Jupiter. "Chief Reynolds told me about you," she said. "And you too, Bob, and Pete. He said, if I remember correctly, that your talent for stirring up trouble is only exceeded by your knack for figuring things out." "It's a mixed compliment," said Jupiter. "All right," said Mrs. Dobson, and she stood up. "Tom and I pack and move out with all the fuss possible, and then you boys hide someplace and watch the house. I'll go along with you part way. We'll leave the door open so that the nut, whoever he is, can get in, although he doesn't seem to have had any trouble doing that so far, and whenever he wants to. But unless the guy is really hung up on ceramics, I don't see what he expects to find. This place is full of nothing." "Perhaps it's not," said Jupiter. "We'll see." "One thing," said Mrs. Dobson. "I would like to know what this big dark secret is that is hidden on my father's family tree." "Mrs. Dobson, we really don't have time to explain right now," said Jupiter. "It will be dark in half an hour. Please, let's hurry and get you moved out." "Okay, but there's another thing." "Yes," said Jupiter. "The minute Tom and I get into town, I'm going straight to that police chief and tell him what you're doing," announced Miss Dobson. "If somebody starts to play rough, you're going to need help." The three investigators paused, and then, "Well, that might be a wise idea," said Jupiter. "Hey, Jupe, it'll wreck everything if a police car comes roaring up here," protested Pete. "I'm sure Mrs. Dobson would be able to persuade Chief Reynolds not to come roaring," said Jupiter. We'll ride part way back to Rocky Beach on our bikes," he told Miss Dobson. "When we're out of sight of the house, we'll stop, conceal the bicycles in the undergrowth beside the road, and then return here. The scrub growth on the hillside is especially thick right now. No one on the road will see us, and we will not be seen from Hilltop House either. Tell Chief Reynolds that we will be keeping watch from just beyond the oleander hedge behind the house." "Hey, say, can we move now?" pleaded Bob. There was a state of urgency in his voice. "It's getting dark." "Come on, Tom," said Miss Dobson. The two went up the stairs, 2 steps at a time, and the 3 investigators waiting in the kitchen heard drawers open and close and wardrobe doors bang and suitcases thump on the floor. In 4 minutes, Louise Dobson came swiftly down the stairs carrying a square cosmetic case and a small suitcase. Tom followed her with 2 larger bags. "A record," Jupiter applauded. "Did you bring everything? Toothbrushes, everything?" "Everything," said Mrs. Dobson, "but it's going to be a mess when I am back." "That can always be straightened out later," said Jupiter. He took the small suitcase from Miss Dobson, and Pete relieved Tom of one of the bigger bags. Jupe looked around. "All right, let's go," he said. They started down the hall towards the front door, and as they passed the office, Miss Dobson suddenly stopped. "Wait!" she cried. "Tom, get the box." What box?" asked Pete. "Oh, I went through my father's things," said Miss Dobson. Her tone was a bit defiant. "I wasn't snooping, I was just wondering, and I found a box with some personal things in it. Nothing important. A picture of my mother and father taken on their wedding day. A bunch of letters from my mother and some from me, and Jupiter, I don't want anyone pawing through that stuff." "I understand, Miss Dobson," said Jupiter. He took the second suitcase from Tom Dobson, and Tom ducked into the Potter's office and emerged with a cardboard box about a foot square. "My grandfather seems to have saved everything," he said. Pete got the front door open, and the procession filed out past the two urns towards Miss Dobson's car, which stood near the Potter's supply shack. Jupiter raised his voice. "I'm sorry you've decided to leave, Miss Dobson," he said. "Huh?" said Miss Dobson. "I'm frightened," whispered Jupiter. "Oh, yes," said Miss Dobson, and then she raised her voice, and she became almost shrill. "Jupiter Jones, if you think you can hang around here while somebody burns the house down around my ears, you're crazy." And she put her cosmetic case down on the ground beside the car and opened the boot. "So, as far as I'm concerned," she announced, "for all the world to hear, I wish I had never had a father, and I wish I had been born an orphan." Miss Dobson energetically hurled suitcases into the boot of the car. "And if I ever see Rocky Beach or this house ever again, it will be too soon for me. Tom, give me that box." Tom handed the box of old letters to his mother, and she started to cram it into the car. Suddenly, "Hold it," said a voice from behind the Potter's shack. The three investigators and the Dobsons turned. There, in the dense golden light of the sunset, stood the jaunty fisherman holding a gun. "Everybody just stand there quietly," said Ferrier. "Don't move, and you won't get hurt." The fisherman trained his gun on Eloise Dobson. I think," said Pete, "that something went wrong with our schedule." "Give me the box," ordered Ferrier. "Better still, open the box and dump it out here on the ground." It's only some letters to my grandfather," said Tom Dobson. "Open it," snapped Ferrier. "I want to see." "Don't argue with the man," advised Jupiter. Tom sighed, hauled the square carton out of the boot, opened up and upended it. A massive envelope slid into a heap on the ground. "It was filled with letters," exclaimed the jaunty fisherman. He sounded genuinely surprised. "What, you were expecting a diamond tiara or something?" asked Tom. The man called Ferrier took one step forward. "What do you—" he began, and then he checked himself. "The suitcases," he ordered. "Take them back into the house. I think they're too small, but we'll see." Eloise Dobson knelt and scooped the letters into the cardboard carton while the boy removed the suitcases from the boot of the blue convertible. Then the Dobsons and the three investigators marched back into the Potter's house, with Mr. Ferrier and his gun bringing up the rear. In the hallway, Miss Eloise Dobson fumed as the boys were forced to empty her suitcases out onto the floor. Young Tom's bag was also opened, and the contents spread out for the inspection of the insolent Mr. Ferrier. "So you didn't find it," said Mr. Ferrier at last. "I was sure when I saw that cardboard box." "Find what, for heaven's sake?" demanded Miss Dobson. You don't know?" said Ferrier. His voice was very smooth. "No, you really don't know." "Just as well. In fact, my dear, charming Miss Dobson, it's just as well you never find out. Now, everybody down in the cellar." "I will not!" cried Miss Dobson. "Yes, Mrs. Dobson, you will," said Ferrier. "I've already searched the cellars. The walls are solid brick, and the floors are cement, undisturbed for decades. It will make an excellent resting place for you while I finish my business. You see, there are no windows in that cellar." "It was you who searched the house on Saturday," accused Jupiter. "Yeah, unfortunately I did not have time to finish," said Ferrier. "I found only one treasure on that occasion." And Ferrier took a huge bunch of keys from his pocket. "The Potter's keys," said Jupiter. "Yeah, the second set, I assume," smirked Ferrier. It was thoughtful of him to leave them in his desk, though. "All right, everybody, move it." The Dobsons and the investigators moved down the hall and through the kitchen and there into the cellar. Mrs. Dobson stopped only long enough to click the light switch at the top of the stairs before she went down into the bare, brick-walled place. "You shouldn't be too uncomfortable here," said Mr. Ferrier from the top of the stairs. and no doubt someone will miss you before long and come looking for you." With that, the jaunty fisherman closed the cellar door on them. A key turned in the lock and then was removed. A bolt on the door slid in place. "I wish my grandfather hadn't been such a fanatic about locks," mourned young Tom Dobson. "Oh, I don't know," said Jupiter Jones. He sat down on the cellar stairs and looked around. "It's not the ideal place to spend protracted periods of time, but it's far more comfortable than being tied up. I'm sure that our guess was correct, and that the man who calls himself Farrier will now search the house thoroughly. It must have been that carton full of letters that did it. When he saw that, he decided that we had found what he was looking for. Our trap has been sprung." Yes, it has," said Pete bitterly. "Only we're the ones who got caught." Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Next week will be our final reading, as we will conclude next week with chapters 17, 18, and 19, concluding our mystery of the flaming footprints. Have a great week, and I will read to you next week. Goodbye.